Well, welcome everyone to NRAPE on Campus's Sexual Assault Awareness Month event entitled Technology as a Tool Towards Healing and Justice for Survivors. I am Kenyora Parham, the Chief Executive Officer of NRAPE on Campus, and I am absolutely thrilled to be hosting this event. It is an absolute pleasure and privilege to be here with all of you today as we delve into some fascinating discussions about technology as it relates to sexual violence. But before we begin, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available for future viewing. So please take note of that. But for now, I want to take a moment to frame the conversation for today. So the objective of today's event is to explore the potential of technology in advancing our advocacy efforts against sexual violence while keeping survivors' voices and needs at the forefront. We aim to walk away with a deeper understanding of how technology can amplify survivors' voices, dismantle systemic barriers, and foster healing and justice within our communities. Further, to give you some insights as to what our format is going to be for today, each of us, including myself, will have about 5 to 10 minutes to present to you our respective technology tools. And following the presentation, each of us are going to come together to engage in a brief conversation to dive a little deeper into the overall objectives of the discussion. So we'll have time for Q&A, possibly, depending on how the conversation flows, but please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function or directly in the chat, however, which way you choose. And we'll be sure to answer your question. And if not, we will definitely send a follow-up to answer your question. So with that said, before we begin, I would love for you all to hear from our Powered By supporter, Latina Promoviendo Comunidad, or Lambda Pi Chi Sorority Incorporated. And with that, I'll pass it over to Melissa and Ava.
Hello, thank you, Kenyora, for the introduction. And my name is Melissa Ramos. I'm the current National Vice President of Marketing over at Latinas Promoviendo Comunidad, Lambda Pi Chi Sorority Incorporated. And when I was first approached about Sexual Assault Awareness Month from Ava and Kenyora, there's no questions asked that we wanted to sponsor this event because in Greek life, let's be honest, this is an issue that we sweep under the rug, particularly I think in multicultural Greek life. We can't act like it doesn't happen when 1 in 4 women will experience some form of sexual violence on 33 of our major college campuses here in the US. So it's important for us to be at the forefront of that conversation if we are to be true allies. And our vision at Lambda Pi Chi Sorority is to create a lifetime network of hermanas dedicated to empowering not only themselves and their community, and in this day and age, their community involves their online community in these digital spaces. So I'm very excited that we are sponsoring this event, and hopefully this can lead to more conversations. And for our members, if you're interested in what type of resources we have to offer you at a national level, all of the organizations here will be linked in our link tree, and you will be able to find more resources there. I know, let's not act like these situations don't happen. If and when they do, you have resources available to you. I know it may not be easy coming to someone in your chapter, your regional board, or even the national board. So it's important to know that there are online tools for you to take advantage of and then take the next step. So I'm excited for all the panelists here to share the work they do because it's incredibly important. And I'm going to pass it off to our sorority founder and president, Eva Sosa Grandison.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here with you all today. I want to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude to Melissa Ramos, our recently appointed Vice President of Marketing, for her dedication and leadership in spearheading the messaging and marketing efforts for all of our Sexual Assault Awareness Month events on behalf of Lambda Pi Chi Sorority Incorporated. Lambda Pi Chi Sorority involvement in this event is indeed part of a larger effort by a collaboration of Latina sororities called Voces Unidas, cultivating community. This is an effort to unite our voices to raise awareness of the issue of sexual assault and to cultivate community resilience against abuse and harassment. To all those who have joined us from our broader community, I extend our warmest welcome. So, as National President of Lambda Pi Chi Sorority Incorporated and one of the 5 sorority founders, I extend my gratitude to End Rape on Campus, EROC, and their CEO, Kenyora Parham, for allowing us to be a part of powering this webinar today. It's a privilege to be able to collaborate with EROC, especially as we celebrate our 36th anniversary this week. As a Latina sorority, our mission is to empower women and fearlessly reshape spaces as needed. So our journey with EROC actually began with our contribution to building the campus accountability tool. Was it in 2022? Was it 2022? But nonetheless, we're excited to continue our support through today's webinar. So thank you all for joining us today as we unite our efforts to make a meaningful impact. And once again, thank you to Kenyora and all the panelists.
Thank you, Melissa and Ava, and congratulations on your anniversary. Happy anniversary. As a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, I completely understand all the things that Melissa has talked about, especially with regard to sexual violence, especially in the sorority spaces. So I am just absolutely honored to have you all here and be a Powered By supporter for this event. So thank you. With that, I will now take the time to introduce you all to our fellow panelists. So Sarefa Boyling from Callisto is Callisto's Director of Programs and Strategic Engagement. She has over 10 years of experience in higher education fields, working with students in various capacities, including housing, multicultural affairs, admissions, civic engagement, and national service. She believes that college is a time in a young person's life where they have the opportunity to pursue their passions and, most importantly, explore and redefine their identity and views. This informs her continued commitment to serving, educating, and supporting college students across the United States. She holds a master's in social justice education from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a bachelor's of organizing theme from Union College in Schenectady, New York. Raise your hand, Sarefa, and say hi. Also, if you hear my Bostonian accent come out, it's just because I was back in Boston this weekend, so forgive me. Our next presenter is Kyle Linton from Our Wave. Kyle serves as the executive director, and he was inspired to start Our Wave after his loved one experienced sexual assault in 2018. Using over 10 years of experience building software products in a variety of industries, Kyle wanted to create a safe space where survivors could share their stories, access healing resources, and being a part of a global community. To date, Our Wave has over 60,000 users, stories from 42 countries, and a volunteer team of 15 people across the globe. Raise your hand, Kyle. Say hi. And last and certainly not least is Shashina Bray from Me Too International. As mother, therapist, advocate, educator, Shashina A. Bray is a Boston native who has taken up roots in Philadelphia. Shashina came to Philadelphia to attend Temple University and fell in love with the rich culture of the city. In service to her new home, Shashina dedicated over a decade to deepening her understanding of her community's needs as an educator and social justice grassroots advocate. In 2014, Shashina realized her service to Black and Brown communities was best actualized through her passion, mental and emotional wellness. Honing her focus and training, Shashina earned her MSED in mental health counseling from the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education in 2016. And in 2017, Shashina launched Going Inward Wellness, LLC. Through Going Inward Wellness, LLC, Shashina serves individuals and couples for psychotherapy, teaches yoga, hosts wellness workshops for global majority women, teaches mindfulness to youth and adults, and offers professional wellness development to businesses and organizations. Notable assignments and partnerships include the People's Emergency Center, Black Star Film Festival, the North Philadelphia Community Healing Project, Village of Arts and Humanity, Girl Trek, the Institute of Contemporary Art Philadelphia, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books, which I need to go to one day. Shashina currently serves as the lead clinician in Life After Trauma organization, LATO, and more recently, she has taken her organizational development skills and her clinical skills to support survivors of sexual violence as the program director for Me Too International, where she helps to lead the organization's healing work and global network development. Raise your hand, Shashina, and say hi. Awesome, awesome. Well, with that said, I am now going to kick us off and share more about NRAPE on Campus's campus accountability mapping tool. And then following me will then be, you'll hear from Sarefa, and then Kyle, and then Tashina, and then we'll engage in that more roundtable discussion. So I'm going to get us set up and started. And start sharing my screen. All right. You all can see my PowerPoint? Thumbs up. Perfect. All right. Awesome. So with NRAPE on Campus's campus accountability map and tool. So prior to me getting started about the mapping tool itself, just want to give some background for those who may not be as familiar with NRAPE on Campus. In 2013, we were founded by then students Annie E. Clark and Andrea Pina Silva from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Sophie Karasek from the University of California, Berkeley, after they had connected and shared their harrowing experiences of sexual assault, interpersonal violence, and subsequent dismissal responses from their respective universities. They essentially understood that students from across the United States did not understand their rights under Title IX, and essentially went across the United States to all multiple countries. I want to say around 26,000 miles, literally driving in their cars to inform student survivors of their rights. And during that time, they decided to found NRAPE on Campus, as you know today. And so our mission works to end campus sexual violence through support, education, and policy reform, while centering on historically excluded and systemically marginalized student survivors. We envision a world where every individual has an educational experience that is free from violence, and until then, that all survivors are believed, trusted, and supported. We also help survivors of sexual violence band together to support one another and to shift our culture from one to one of safety and respect. And our work really supports our long-term goal of increasing transparency, accountability on campuses across the country. And I also just want to furthermore say that our mission and our vision is driven by our Centering the Margins framework, which aims to address and fill the disparity of resources between different communities with the intention of centering historically excluded and systemically marginalized student survivors. So over the past decade, survivors of campus sexual violence across the country has banded together like never before to support one another and to shift our culture, as I mentioned earlier, from one to that of safety and respect. But whether it's redefining consent or pressuring schools to conduct annual campus climate surveys, the new generation of advocates knows that transparency and accountability are the keys to creating meaningful long-term change. One of the things that we've also come across when we've been speaking to students from across different campuses in the United States, including Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands, we've understood that there is no nationwide system to access information about sexual assault statistics, survivor support resources, or reporting mechanisms that allow students to move forward with how they wish when it comes to their experience with sexual assault. What we've also learned is that not every college or university has information readily available and easy to access on a website. I mean, how many of you can remember when you've gone to your college's website or when you were deciding on which college you wanted to attend that, you know, one, you probably wasn't thinking about Title IX efforts. Well, at least I hope you really weren't, because that's where we want to be. But if you have gone onto your school's website and you were looking for this information, you may not have seen it at the footer of that school's website, or you might have had to go through various web pages just to find the information you're looking for. And what we've also found out is that student survivors, parents, advocates, campus administrators even sometimes have seen that this information that they have been seeking is to no avail. And so we also know that with sexual assault experiences that occur on and off campus, the Title IX reporting process is one that's always daunting. It's not easily accessible. And if anything, there are multiple student survivors who often experience feeling shame by their Title IX coordinators or other campus administrators, They're often ignored when they're reporting, or they're dismissed if it doesn't meet the technical definitions of sexual harassment on campuses. In fact, one of our wonderful partners in this movement, Know Your Nine, had conducted the cost of reporting study, in which they were able to state that nearly 40% of survivors who reported to their school would be pushed out of education as a result of all the things that have transpired when they had tried to report their sexual assault experience. Because of this has resulted in what we have seen to be the power of transparency in action. So just in the most recent 5 years, survivors have begun to break silence about institutional cover-ups, hold their institutions accountable under Title IX, and spurring institutions to change their ways or risk scrutiny in the public eye. For us at EROC, we decided to meet this moment by empowering and informing students, parents, and communities with the Campus Accountability Mapping Tool. Now, this tool essentially enables current and prospective students to compare sexual assault policies of colleges and universities across the United States, including in-depth information on their investigation policies, high-level statistics, prevention efforts, and support resources. Because we believe that through increased transparency and accountability, we can break the silence about institutional cover-ups and hold institutions accountable, especially under Title IX. So I just mentioned a few kind of parameters that we use. And those parameters include numerical statistics on campus incidences from the Department of Education. So this includes the number of reported rapes, fondlings, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking that is listed in compliance with the Clery Act. Another parameter is policy information. So any sexual assault prevention training that a university sponsors, for example, and that they may require for all students qualifies under this category, including like self-defense trainings, which often put the onus back on victims, don't qualify. So we don't actually add this information as part of this policy piece. And then we, if anything, do prioritize in-person training because research has shown us that students are much more likely to retain knowledge and engage if they are held in a more smaller group in person in comparison to online, which is kind of ironic that we're talking about technology. Our third parameter is prevention efforts. So a summary of college or university definitions and policies like that of consent, sexual assault, retaliation, just to name a few. Our fourth is investigation procedures. So a summary of how the college or university investigates claims of sexual assault, how they decide on responsibility, sanctions, if they have appeal evaluations, whether they train investigators, and have that sanction data published, just to give you a few examples. And then lastly is survivor support resources. So a summary of college or university's resources provided to survivors of sexual assault, including that of accommodations, any type of sexual assault or like health centers that are available on campus, including medical services, and trauma-informed training for police officers. One more thing I want to mention is that this kind of chart here just provides you with a number of colleges and universities that are currently on the mapping tool as of today. So with just over 1688 schools, we make an impact of about over 6 million students, both undergrad and graduate levels. This does not include high school students who may be using this mapping tool as a means on deciding where they decide they want to go to school. So these are just some of our long-term goals. We really aim the mapping tool to be a powerful tool to help students and their families make informed decisions as they consider campus safety within the next steps of their journey. So this includes advocacy. So really making sure that we can use the data to advocate for policy changes on the campus, from whether it's campus safety, both locally and federally. Second is our transparency goal, which we want to make sure provides everyone with access to data and information to make those informed decisions. And third is accountability. So really making sure that we're fostering collective responsibility to reduce instances of campus sexual assault through our efforts. So with that, I want to share with you just a live demo, and I hope you all can still see this. Let's see. And just a thumbs up in the chat just to give me an idea. I can see a different screen than in comparison to y'all. Cool. So when you go to NRAPE on Campus's website, you click down on the map and tool, and this just gives you some more of the information that I had mentioned here, including some of our partners and what they've said about the tool and contributors who've helped to create this tool, including Latinas Promovido Comunidad, as you can see down here. So what you would do is you would click on this tool. And it would load, and you'll see basically a pop-up come up just to tell you that this is a pilot program and that we aim to increase this data, update this data, especially each year. We want to make sure we have the most recent data. But I will say that what I'm about to share with you only has between 2018 and 2022 data. So, and then another pop-up would typically come up to ask you like what type of, like who you are, just so we know who's using the map. So I'm gonna actually put my school's information in. I went to Simmons for undergrad in Massachusetts, particularly Boston. And essentially here, it gives you the kind of profile of that campus and gives you more information about where the numerical statistics were derived from. So this is the Clary data that I had mentioned earlier, and it gives you insight as to what it looks like from the national average, whether the school is under investigation, maybe a single gender school, or if it's public. And then you can also, if you want to click on the eye icons if you need more information, and sometimes information is not available. Or you can click onto the policy stats, which just basically give you information whether something is there or not. And so if you see a green check mark, it means yes. If you see an X, it means no, and a question mark, it's unsure. So that, and then here is the approach, sorry. That just gives you more of that investigation procedures, information, prevention efforts, survivor support, and accessibility. So wherever you also see an underline here, it just gives you more of an information about what that term means. And then of course, a little pop-up to see how well you would recommend the mapping tool. And then this is kind of the bread and butter. So just to kind of randomly choose schools here, I don't want to put any other school on blast, but just to give you an idea, if you need to or want to do a little bit of comparison, and I'll actually go to Simmons on this one just to give you a little more insight there. So this just gives you up to 3 schools to compare the statistical data in any of the 4 approaches that I had mentioned as well earlier. So you can see which schools has what, which schools don't have something, or maybe there is something there, but we just wasn't able to find it. So feel free to take a look at our campus accountability map and tool and use it as much as you like. And if there's ever an error, please don't hesitate to let us know. We are ones to make sure we have the most accurate data possible. And that way you can use the tool. So it's free. And if it's free, it's always for me. So with that said, I am now going to pass it on to Sarefa.
Thank you, Kenyora, for sharing the awesome CAMT. I did put the link in the chat as you were talking for folks to be able to easily access where they can get that information. So just a trigger warning, the slide that I'm about to put up does have a mention of rape, sexual harassment, and assault on it directly. And again, if, as we're talking about this topic, if you do need to step away from your computer, I highly encourage you to do so, and then join us when you are in a better place and space. Again, my name is Sarefa Bowling. I am the Director of Programs and Strategic Engagement at Callisto, and super excited to share more with you all about who we are and what our organization does. So just to do the check, making sure people can see that screen. Okay, awesome. So Callisto is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to use technology to support survivors of sexual violence. We were founded in 2011 by Just Lad, a survivor of campus sexual assault, who pioneered the idea that technology could be used to both empower and securely connect survivors. It was her vision and belief in the power of connection that laid the foundation for the work that we currently do, which centers around educating our communities and addressing the issue of serial perpetration. And we do that with an emphasis on higher education right now. So many of us are familiar with the viral hashtag #MeToo. The viral hashtag #MeToo. I put hashtag again, that helped highlight the significant number of women who have been impacted by sexual violence. However, in the most recent years, specifically in the last 3 to 4 years, what we have seen is a larger expansion around the hashtag #MeToo to include an underaddressed issue, which is serial perpetrators. Here's what we know about the issue of serial perpetration. These are 3 things. One is testing backlogged rape kits in major cities like Detroit, Cleveland, and Memphis between 2009 and 2021 resulted in the identification of more than 1,300 suspected serial rapists who committed crimes, including rape and other violent crimes, in at least 40 states and Washington, D.C. We've also seen an increased media attention around serial perpetrators, including folks like Harvey Weinstein, Larry Nassar, Bill Cosby, Jeffrey Epstein, and even in the last couple months on a number of campuses that include the University of Arkansas, Northwestern University, and Columbia University, just to name a few. Finally, academic research points to the fact that 4 to 16% of college men admit on anonymous or confidential surveys to at least one incident of non-consensual sexual contact. Let's assume for the purposes of this presentation that the number, we'll take that average, which is around 10%. With our college male enrollment sitting at around 6.5 million males, we are looking at 650,000 male perpetrators. And about 2/3 of those perpetrators have admitted to offending more than once. Therefore, 9.6% of assaults against women by men are committed by one-time offenders, meaning that 90.4% of sexual assaults on college campuses are committed by repeat offenders. They are on average offending 6 times before they graduate. And what we know is that if we're able to hold perpetrators accountable at their second offense versus their 6th, we have the potential of preventing 59% of all campus sexual assaults from happening in the first place. That is why we need to be talking about perpetrators. We have to be attuned to this issue of serial perpetration on our campuses and within our communities, and for the purpose of this discussion, on campuses which serve as a microcosm of what we see at the larger societal level. We have a responsibility to educate our communities about this issue and create systems of accountability and support to address serial perpetration head on. We at Callisto have specifically designed a solution, Callisto Vault, which is an encrypted platform that is uniquely designed to protect the privacy of survivors while allowing them to learn if others were harmed by the same perpetrator. So what we will have is our CEO, Tracy DiTomasi, share a little bit more with you about our proprietary matching system.
Have you ever wondered if your perpetrator has assaulted someone else? 90% of sexual assaults on college campuses are committed by serial perpetrators who on average offend 6 times while in college. The Me Too movement showed us that there is power in connecting survivors, both in knowing that you're not alone and also in identifying and holding perpetrators accountable. However, in order to find others, survivors have had to file a formal report, which is often re-traumatizing, or rely on anonymous story-sharing platforms, which are not secure and can lead to defamation lawsuits. But those were their only options, until now. That's why our encrypted platform, Callisto Vault, particularly our matching system, is a game changer. Entering into matching is super quick. Just go to callistovault.org and create your free account using your .edu email address. Select the state where the assault perpetrator that you know. This can be their social media handles, phone number, or email address. If 2 or more survivors from any college enter the same unique identifier, our system will register a match. Then all matched survivors will be contacted and receive free and confidential legal options counseling, if that's what you want. Your data remains encrypted and secure, and what happens next is entirely up to you. And whether or not you choose to take further action, at least you'll know you're not alone. To learn more, follow us at Callisto or check out our website, projectcallisto.org.
So to just share a little bit more, in addition to what you saw from Tracy, why is the matching system powerful? One, it puts the onus back on the perpetrator, removing some of the stigma, shame, and blame that survivors often internalize, because the match makes it clear that the perpetrator is a predator. Oftentimes, this validation will jumpstart a survivor's healing journey. More importantly, it helps to establish a pattern of evidence that has the potential to increase justice and accountability outcomes for those perpetrators who are causing harm, ultimately reducing sexual assault on college campuses. And fun fact, our services are actually available to anyone with an active.edu email address at a college or university in the United States and its territories for free. Now, let's talk about how we got here and where we are going. We started in 2015 with the development of Callisto Campus, which was a tool that universities paid for to help encourage reporting to Title IX, which is a department in U.S. colleges and universities that addresses sexual assault. The team learned a lot of lessons after piloting that technology to several schools. The main feedback that survivors wanted was that survivors wanted options before reporting to authorities. Another issue was that universities often did not want to solve the issue of serial perpetration, and survivors didn't trust the universities to address the problem after repeated instances of institutional betrayal. Integrating this important feedback from survivors, Callisto developed new technology that was completely separate from university reporting systems. This technology, which is called Callisto Vault, was scheduled to be launched in the fall of 2020. However, the pandemic, along with the departure of our founders, significantly impacted our timeline. So our official pilot didn't begin until the fall of 2021. The pilot, in which involved approximately 40 campuses, was met with enthusiasm among students and resulted in a 15% match rate, meaning 15% of submitted entries matched with another survivor of the same perpetrator. We also have had cross-campus matches, which means survivors attend 2 different schools, as well as matches where 3 or more survivors identified the same offender. In October of 2023, we hit a huge milestone when we expanded free access to our encrypted platform to every college campus in the US and its territories. That means that staff, faculty, and students who have experienced any form of sexual violence can use our system. As we continue to push forward, we continue to solicit feedback from survivors to help expand our features and our options. We're also in the process of revamping our legal options counseling program to include the use of legal advocates and build a robust referral network. Finally, we are beginning to research how we can expand our services outside of the higher education context to eventually serve everyone. As I wrap up, I want to invite you to visit our website at projectcallisto.org and give us a follow on Instagram at Callisto. Thank you for your time, and I will now invite Kyle Linton of ArtWave to share more with you about how they are leveraging technology to serve survivors.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarefa. Thanks everybody for being on the call today. EROC, thank you for hosting. Again, some of the topics that I'll discuss here can be a little bit sensitive for folks, and so would continue to encourage folks to take a step away if needed. But just before I jump into providing a little bit more visual information, my name is Kyle Linton. I'm the executive director of ArtWave. We're based here in Raleigh, North Carolina, but we've got volunteers and folks that work with us from across the world. We were founded in 2018 and really wanted to come at this space with a technology background and try to contribute our skills. And in the process, we've learned a lot about the space and how we can create the best possible tools to support survivors after experiencing sexual violence. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So I put together a couple screens here to sort of walk through what we do our different focus areas. And I'm more than happy to follow up with anyone to show a full demo of the platform and some of the different services that we offer. But really, the way we view ourselves is as a safe harbor for survivors of sexual harm and their allies. We want to create the best-in-class online tools and work directly with partners, a lot of folks on this call we work with, to create these spaces for survivors to find healing and to connect with other resources and to support other survivors in the process of their own healing journey. And so really, we were founded in 2018, like I mentioned, to build this community where survivors of sexual harm could be heard. So facilitating the process of disclosure for survivors, believed and supported. And we think that the first primary step to that is really storytelling. We think storytelling is incredibly powerful. We've seen the power of the Me Too movement over the years and all of the smaller movements that have come up from under that. And we believe that survivors deserve a safe and anonymous space to share their experiences with an empathetic community of support, hope, and most importantly, healing. And so, oops, went backwards. And so just talking about the problem a little bit more, when we got into this space, we really saw that, on social media and certain platforms, that there was this social media platforms gave a voice to survivors and a place to share their stories. But oftentimes we felt like there were survivors that were missed, folks that wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable sharing their story in front of friends and family or feel comfortable connecting with other survivors. We also saw individual communities pop up at different universities or different places where survivors would share their stories, and then there would be legal repercussions for the named survivors, for perpetrators that were named. And so we really wanted to focus our efforts then to create a safe space where survivors could share their stories and find pathways to healing, data-driven pathways to access healing. And so the first step of our process was we wanted to create an anonymous and encrypted platform for survivors to share their stories. So what that involves is a process for survivors to share, certain messages, their full story and messages of hope or healing that they'd like to share with other survivors. We then redact all identifiable content on the back end using some proprietary technology that we built. And then those stories are then posted. And so, starting with that point of disclosure, we felt like that was a conduit then to connect with survivors and provide other resources. So then over time, we've really started focusing on building out other components to our platform. Can we create expert-driven ways for survivors to learn, better understand their own experiences, better understand, the sort of situations that they were in, understand the symptoms that they have after experiencing traumatic events. And then from that place of education, can we foster community? Can we bring survivors together? Can we connect them with each other? Can we create these micro communities of understanding of survivors with similar experiences? And then ultimately, how do we empower survivors to find their own unique healing journeys and to give back to this broader movement? Our name was sort of based on this idea that waves can be small, but waves can also be incredibly powerful. And so we really wanted to sort of create this ripple effect with all of these different voices coming together, but using best-in-class technology to understand the patterns and the data and the trends behind those things, and to publish research on that and create this broader movement while leaving room for these individual subgroups that fall under that movement. And so, we really created this, what it really is a trauma-informed online social media platform specifically created for survivors of sexual violence. And in the process of that, we understand that there's a lot of overlapping, interest from other survivors. We have survivors who experience sexual violence and domestic violence and mental health issues and substance abuse issues. So we really want to try to unpack the complexities of these different issues, but ultimately with the focus on survivors of sexual harm, harassment, and violence. And in the process of this sort of understanding through disclosure, we recognize that healing really looks different for everyone. A survivor that's in a military context that experiences it at the hand of their superior might have a very different experience than somebody who experiences it when they were child abuse or a religious institution or in a collegiate environment. So we feel like there's room to sort of build this broader movement, but also leave room for these, nuanced sort of factors that survivors have in regards to their own unique stories. And then something else I'll talk about that we've been getting a lot of traction recently with is we've also pivoted to also focusing heavily on also supporting survivors and answering their questions. We feel like giving survivors a conduit to ask us questions in the voice that they would use or with the specific semantics and language that they would choose has really opened a door to, taking our research sort of focused team to providing empirically validated responses to those survivors, citing the best-in-class resources and research that is available. And so we've been able to sort of really unpack these nuanced and difficult questions from survivors of all different backgrounds and experiences, and then present those answers to the world, and even in the future, train artificial intelligence and other models to respond to survivors based on the specific semantics or terminology that they would like to use. Really, to date, we've been growing this community immensely. So we launched and we just had a few thousand people accessing our stories and interacting and taking part in our community. But what you'll see here is we're seeing this huge amount of organic growth because survivors are telling stories and then other people are reading those stories. Survivors are asking questions, other folks are finding those questions. And we're seeing this sort of organic growth as we move along and seeing these pathways of survivors, getting a better understanding of their unique experiences and accessing other resources. For example, we can sort of anonymously track and see that a survivor from a particular country might share their story or might read a question, and then they'll read 2 or 3 stories, and then they'll submit their story. And then we'll see this sort of effect of this growing where other people are coming in, reading different forms of stories, finding content that resonates with them, not feeling so alone, engaging with that content, and then accessing healing resources and other organizations that we partner with to really sort of try to move past, compartmentalize their trauma and support other folks in the process of their healing. Like Kenyora mentioned, I think in the intro, we've worked with over 70,000 survivors on our platform, released a ton of educational questions. We're creeping up on 1,000 stories, and it's also fascinating to us to understand the dynamics of one survivor might feel comfortable sharing their story, but 10 or 100 survivors might be reading that story and just never disclose on a platform and find other resources. So understanding in a data-driven way these patterns between survivors, how they're accessing resources, what's most beneficial, and how we can most help people moving forward. And an example of that is we've had 137,000 clicks on resources. So once a survivor submits their story, we send them specific resources. Like if we see, call it suicidal themes in a particular story, then we'll send them suicide-related resources. So how do we become more custom and triage and meet people where they're at in the process of providing resources, but do that in a scalable way? We've also received stories from over 45 states, over 42 countries. So this is very much an international platform. We want this to be a space for anyone and everyone who's experienced sexual violence, sexual harm, sexual assault. And we want to get into the weeds and understand the nuance, in sort of cultural context, in environmental context, and leave room for different folks with different experiences. And really the last thing I'd say is we can't do this alone. I think this is a wonderful webinar that's sort of put together because we're working with almost all the organizations in this call, very earnestly. I think we have this shared vision of really how do we use data? How do we use technology? How do we meet survivors where they're at? We use a statistic a lot that, our argument is that over 90% of survivors are accessing online resources. And there is absolutely a place for in-person resources. They're absolutely critical. But how do we meet people where they're at? How do we create warm handoffs between organizations? How do we give different tools in the toolkit, whether it's connecting people to legal resources or connecting them with other healing platforms or community? Like, how do we really facilitate these connections to support survivors in the best way possible? And we're certainly a piece of that, and we're growing a piece of it and expanding the technology. Like I mentioned earlier, some of our interest areas are to sort of even lean further into how technology can support by building personalized digital healing experiences of sexual harm powered by ethical AI. So, we really see this opportunity to use technology to support the work we're doing, to better support, survivors, and to create this broader wave of change, as cliche as that is. So thank you for taking some time to listen to the work that we're doing. My email is just kyle@rwave.org. Would be happy to connect. We white label this platform, this story sharing platform, for other organizations to build this collective movement together. White labeling meaning we give them branded versions of StorySite, and we'd love to connect and see how we can better support survivors. So on that note, I would love to pass it to one of our amazing partners, Shashina, over at Me Too International.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I'm going to share screen. Okay. Peace, good afternoon. Thank you all for your time, for your patience. And also thank you to my fellow co-presenters. Thank you, Kyle, for also naming, yeah, we're in partnership. We came together for this, but we also work together regularly. And so that's also a really beautiful component of this work, that it transcends these screens. It gives us the opportunity to really think about how can we do this work more intentionally on a day-to-day basis. So thank you to our fellow partners. As mentioned, my name is Shashina Bray. I'm the program director at Me Too International. For those who are unfamiliar, Me Too is a survivor-led racial justice organization working to disrupt sexual violence. We do believe in a world free of sexual violence, and we take an approach of healing and action in order to meet that. It always feels important to name who we are and what we do, because lots of folks are familiar with the hashtag. It was even referenced here. And so the hashtag has a life of its own. It lives in the world, and we invite people to use it. We take we have no desire to control the hashtag, but it's also important to know that there is a movement and an organization that continues to power that understanding that, yes, your story matters, and yes, you can take up space as a survivor. And so that is Me Too International. I mentioned healing and action as the two things that undergird our work. And today I'm going to focus on the aspect of healing specifically and talk a little bit more about Survivor Sanctuary. But we understand that healing is an action in of itself. And for many survivors, healing may be their first action. And so while we invite survivors and we invite advocates into the work of organizing, into the work of movement, into the work of dismantling, we understand that that work is dependent upon our well-being. It's dependent upon our healing. It's dependent on our ability to self-regulate, dependent upon our ability to understand what is happening with us, which is why we advocate for healing and advocate for healing as an action in of itself. And so because of that, we take a trauma-informed approach to the best of our ability in our work, not only in the spaces that we create for other people, but also how we work with each other within the organization. We are a decentralized organization throughout the country. And so our digital properties, which includes metoomovement.org, and then Survivor Sanctuary, is essential to us doing our work. And so if you've never visited metoomovement.org, please take a look. On there, you'll find toolkits and info sheets, one of which we collaborated with Callisto on, around what does it mean as a student to heal in perhaps the same environment in which you've been assaulted or violated. We also have a robust healing resource library. And so this gives people from any of the 50 continental states the opportunity to research some resources that we vetted for them to figure out, hey, can I utilize this in my community? Most of these resources are related to mental and emotional well-being, and we're working on adding additional resources for housing and addictions as well. So our contribution to healing doesn't just start with Survivor Sanctuary. This is just one aspect of it. So what is Survivors Sanctuary? In 2022, we launched Survivor Sanctuary, which is a self-guided healing platform for survivors of sexual violence. We take a thinking about and understanding how to best resolve trauma from a top-down, bottom-up approach, meaning engaging the mind as well as engaging the body. We developed 3 approaches: mind, body, and integrative, and created 36 healing lessons that are 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and 25 minutes in length. Each of these lessons are designed to support survivors in deepening their healing journey, whether they're just starting in their healing journey, maybe this is the first time they've even considered centering their well-being, or they are well along that path of understanding what is happening with their healing and well-being. These lessons are broken down into these timeframes to give survivors as much choice as possible as to how they want to engage their healing journey. We didn't want to be prescriptive and tell people this is what you need to heal, these are the things, and these are the only ways, because we know that healing is not linear, and we know that we cannot be prescriptive. So this is our attempt to give as much access and choice to survivors to start, again, their healing journey, continue their healing journey, and to pair this alongside other tools that they may be using in their healing journeys. So I would love to take you through a walkthrough so that I can show you better than I can tell you about this powerful platform. Can everyone see this? Just double checking. Okay. So I'm already logged in, and so we'll skip the login, but we have a pretty straightforward login process. So we collect your information so we know who's joining the site, so that it's a secure space for all survivors. And then you'd come to our main page. On the page, you'll see our basic headings. And if you scroll down, I want to first take you to the Survivor Sanctuary Welcome by Tarana Burke, who's the founder of the Me Too movement. And then take you to our foundational lessons. So in designing Survivor Sanctuary, we thought it was really important to onboard people to this idea of healing in action, to onboard people to what it means to center their healing and well-being, and not just throw them into a bunch of lessons and say, go at it, be great. And so we have 5 foundational lessons, which anyone coming to the website has to go through in order to access the 36 healing lessons. And so the first lesson is pretty basic on how to navigate the site. The second one is understanding healing and Me Too's theory of healing. The next one is on triggers, as we know that people will be triggered in their healing experience. It's not something that you can avoid. And so what do you do with triggers? What are they, first and foremost? And then what do you do with them? We also have a brief lesson on navigating shame, as we recognize shame as a barrier of healing. And then our final, expand my screen a bit. And the final foundational lesson is a somatic practice that you can take with you as a tool as you're navigating the website. So in the creation of this, we really thought about, what do people need? What do survivors need in order to feel held and cared for? The initial idea around Survivor Sanctuary came from a 6-week processing group for survivors. And what we recognized very early on, despite the great curriculum, is that we didn't adequately have the supports to hold survivors in that type of setting. We're not a direct service provider. Even if we onboarded clinicians, there would still be other supports we thought would be necessary to hold that type of space. And so we thought, how can we offer healing in real time? How can we be supportive of survivors' healing journey? And so we moved those ideas to Survivor Sanctuary. We took that content and we broke it down into digestible lessons that survivors can access. So you come to the site, you navigate through our foundational lessons, and then you can check out our approaches. As I mentioned before, we have 3 approaches: mind, body, and integrative. And so I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. And by going to the mind approach, you can always try a lesson. So even before you register, you can come here and try a lesson to learn more. Once you get to the page, you'll see more about what the mind approach means, what it has to do with your healing journey. Okay, and then you'll see the lessons themselves. Again, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and 25 minutes. And show you some benefits of these approaches. And I'll actually take you to a lesson so you can see what one looks like. And so this is our lesson on creating a joy journal. You can see up top, you can check lessons that you've already completed. You can go back to lessons. You can go back to your approach. So we try to make this as user-friendly as possible, so that navigation doesn't become too cumbersome as you're moving through the page. You'll see at the top here, you can favorite a lesson or remove a favorite. excuse me, for future lessons, and I'll show you the dashboard where this information would show up. Each lesson starts with an intention, so you know, like, what's the purpose of this lesson? We started to add audio and visual to our lessons. Each lesson then goes, how do you need to prepare? What are some considerations for preparation, whether you need materials or whether it's a particular grounding we want to offer to better support you in moving through the lesson. Then we have the activity itself. You'll notice there's a lot of copy on the page. We really spell out what the experience can look like and give lots of details as to what a survivor might want to do in taking on this particular lesson. Each lesson ends with the regrounding moment. Again, we want to bring people back to their body. We don't want to make an assumption about the type of experience that they've had. And so we want to give people an opportunity to be intentional about returning to their body and really returning to a more perhaps relaxed and easeful state before moving on with their day, and or before considering how they might integrate this, right? So each lesson has a suggestion as how you can integrate it. How do you take this content from this digital space and bring it into your day-to-day life? At the bottom of the page, you'll also notice a few other things. You can favorite lessons that you really like or take favorites away. You can rate lessons, which is really helpful for us to understand how people feel about the content that we're sharing with the world. Every little bit counts. We also have this small icon on the bottom, bottom left-hand side, which is Accessibility, which is a plugin that really enhances websites to create as much access as possible for folks who may require screen readers or to have the font changed or to have color changed on the site. This is one small way of creating a bit more access to ensure that folks can take advantage of what's here on Survivor Sanctuary. We also have music that's available on the site that you can stop and play at your own convenience. Okay. Other things I'd like to show you. One of the newest features to Survivor Sanctuary is our dashboard, which is something that we added in the springtime. This creates a more customized experience for members, and it also feels a bit more familiar to program platforms like MySpace or Facebook, where you can really see what you've been doing, or something similar to Blackboard, for those of you who are in school, many of whom you are. And so My Journey allows you to see lessons that you've already taken in each of the approaches, right? So all the foundation lessons are complete because that's the only way to gain access to the other lessons. Then it shows you how many mind lessons, body lessons, and integrative lessons are complete. So once you check at the top of that lesson that you completed, it would register here. You can also look at favorite lessons. Again, those lessons that we highlighted at the bottom. That lesson, at the bottom of the lesson, it was highlighted where you can heart lessons, and you can see all of these lessons here if you'd like to go back to them. At the top of the lesson, you remember we starred a lesson, and so this allows us to see lessons that we want to take in the future, right? So again, survivors can really build their own healing journey here without any issues on how many times they can access something or something running out. This is endless. And then we've also added dates and events. As this year, we've started to do programming from Survivor Sanctuary. We started to think about, this is great content, but not everyone's coming to a digital platform for their healing and well-being, but they may come to a workshop. And so in this last year, we thought about bringing content from Survivor Sanctuary into workshop spaces, and we've been doing bi-monthly workshops. Our next workshop will be held next Wednesday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. I will drop the bit.ly link in the chat when I'm done sharing screen, as registration is still open. We'll be joined by Dr. Sammy Skulk, who's a pleasure activist, who will be talking with us about pleasure. Okay. One other feature I'd like to show you on Survivor Sanctuary is our healing room. And so this was actually a feature that we would use in Me Too spaces before we even had Survivor Sanctuary, but we got such great feedback on it. We said we had to institute it into the website. So this is an intentionally created room that we think is pretty cathartic. And as you move through the room, it takes you off Survivor Sanctuary to different lessons that might be supportive for you. This is accessible to anyone, even if you're not a member of Survivor Sanctuary. Sometimes you just need a breather. We've had folks use this when they're holding meetings as an additional tool that they can access. This is something that we encourage our members to keep in their back pocket when they need to access a quick grounding moment. Okay. This takes you to our healing resource library. So as you move through, you'll get different lessons. Okay. So that's Survivor Sanctuary. There are other components. We have a glossary here. You can go through and see each of the approaches. In some of the approaches, we also have videos. If you go to the body approach right now, we have 5 videos under our 25-minute lessons. We have a Qigong lesson, we have a yoga lesson, we have a meditation lesson, and we're also working on adding more audio and visual to the website. Okay. So just finishing up with Survivor Sanctuary. So many things to move on the screen. We currently have 1,296 members of Survivor Sanctuary. In 2023, we added 543 new members of Survivor Sanctuary, and we're averaging around 150 views per day. And so while this is exciting, there's still a lot for us to learn. And that's something that we're taking very seriously. This webinar is not only about technology, it's also about justice. And so in that understanding, it's not just about having a cool tool that we can say and, you know, go to tech conference and say, we have this thing, but it's also making sure that it's actually responsive to the people that it was created for. And so for that reason, we're listening, and we're asking questions to make sure that survivors feel like this is a tool for them. So some of the things that we're learning are that survivors want spaces that feel safe and centered on their experiences. Might seem obvious, but people care, right? Even down to, well, that's a good lesson, but how does that apply to survivors specifically versus somebody who's impacted by trauma, right? We're learning that survivors are seeking community and want to be in community with each other. We know that when folks are coming to Survivor Sanctuary, that's one of the primary things that they're looking for is community. Survivors want support in navigating their healing journeys, right? They love the options, but maybe it's too many options. We're also learning that survivors want to tell their stories. We're also learning, which again, not a big surprise, nobody wants to read a lot of copy on the page, right? Words are great for our book lovers, but not most of us engage with content in lots of different ways, and it's usually not reading a full page. Most of us are listening to something, we're watching something, and reading, or a combination of the three. And we also are learning that people like our content, but they're slow to engage our content. And I wanted to include this because, and again, in our commitment to justice, it's not just about giving the great stats, it's also about being honest and realistic around what does it mean to create tech as non-tech people. We're advocates, right? We're organizers, and we're utilizing this technological tool to meet the needs of survivors. And so it's always important to be able to bring critique and to bring analysis to what it is that we're doing. So where's Survivor Sanctuary going? In being responsive to some of the things that I just named earlier around our listening, we're working on building a digital community. The reason why we launched the Survivor Sanctuary Community Workshop Series is in an attempt to start building some of that community. Even as we work on building an actual digital community that will live on Survivor Sanctuary, we wanted to start being responsive to this desire for survivors to be in community together, to share ideas with each other, and thus our workshop series. We're also building a member resource tab, which will also be released. I'm very excited. This will be released in June of this year. And this will this will give members of Survivor Sanctuary exclusive access to different resources that can continue to further their healing journey. So again, another way to build community is to incentivize community, to make it feel like community, to make it feel like, oh, this is something that belongs to me in this particular space. We also are rolling out a featured lesson, and this will allow us to introduce new content to Survivor Sanctuary even as we are learning about the effectiveness of the 36 healing lessons we do have. We think the lessons are great, but we want to get more engagement in the lessons to then figure out what lessons we might want to change out. The featured lesson option allows us to be responsive to themes like Sexual Assault Awareness Month, Mental Health Awareness Month, things of that nature, as well as other issues that are part of our narrative strategy, like understanding that sexual violence is a public health crisis, and or how do you tell your story? What is the value of narrative and narrative power? We are also being responsive by making sure we have a space for survivors to tell their stories. And so Kyle mentioned that Our Wave is a white label platform. We're grateful for that technology. We're adding it to Survivor Sanctuary. As of next month, survivors will be able to come to the platform and share their stories of survivorship, and that'll be available through the dashboard. We're also working on guided healing journeys. People love the options of lessons, but sometimes for some survivors, it can feel cumbersome. We take you from a very guided process with the 5 foundational lessons to then a lot of options. And so the feedback is, can you give us more guidance? So we're looking to use, as Kyle said, ethical AI to create some guided healing journeys for survivors who would like that type of experience. We're also going global. The name of the organization is Me Too International. Our work expands beyond US borders. And so we want to make sure, again, we're creating access for members of our community outside the US who don't speak English, primarily French and Spanish speakers, as well as also ensuring that the lessons that we have on Survivor Sanctuary feel culturally relevant to people outside of the US. And then again, towards this idea of creating more access, we want to bring Survivor Sanctuary into app. We want to bring it into people's hands. You can access Survivor Sanctuary via your phone, but of course, like any good platform, it fits better on a phone when it comes by way of an app. Okay. So that is Survivor Sanctuary. I hope that you will check it out. Please stay in community with us this month. Me Too is doing a letter writing campaign where we're asking survivors to write letters to each other and into community. You can check out our Instagram for that as well. You can check out our YouTube. We have lots of video content from previous webinars that we've done. And so it's a good way to get introduced to the organization and learn a little bit more about what we're doing. And I'll go ahead and pause there and hand it over to Kenyora.
Thank you, Shashina, Zarifa, Kyle. If y'all can just throw some emojis, if you can, in the chat, just for these wonderful platforms. Like, I am just absolutely impressed, especially because I've been a partner to see all these things come to life. And so it's just amazing that I get to share this space with these wonderful people who have these wonderful pieces of technology and tools that allow all survivors and folks who are not survivors also to just engage in some holistic healing and holistic community. So I'm just absolutely impressed. I am now going to move us into our next segment, which is more of our panel discussion. And so I now want to, I've been like toggling which questions I want to ask because one, there's just so much information, but we have so little time. So actually what I am going to dive deep into is more about us being more survivor-centered and responsive to evolving needs of survivors. So as we delve deeper into the intersection of technology and survivor advocacy, it's crucial for us to consider how we maintain a survivor-centered approach to the development of implementation of these tools. So in fact, it's by listening to student survivors themselves is why we created our campus accountability mapping tool in the first place. We've had student survivors, lawyers, parents, campus admin, pretty much a lot of folks who came together to help us build out the mapping tool, over 150 people to be exact. So, you know, in the future, we hope to have focus groups where we have students who are involved in how to expand upon the mapping tools features. And so just opening it up to, and Kyle, I'll actually start with you first, and then Sarifa, Shashina, you know, reflecting on our collective experiences and insights, like how can we ensure that the technology we develop remains survivor-centered and responsive to their ever-changing needs?
Yeah, no, Coming from a background in tech and honestly being probably the newest out of all of us to this space, I feel like one of the big lessons that is just deeply and sort of ingrained and sort of put into us is really just listening to survivors. Like, I think it's really easy to make assumptions, when you're creating any sort of technology product or working with anyone about what somebody might want or need. And so, just like it's important to help the survivor who's sharing their story with you, I think it's important to listen to survivors about what sort of resources that they're interested in, what would be most helpful, understanding the context of that, understanding their unique experience. And then I think from the lens of a technologist, it's really how do we ensure with the knowledge that we can gather that we're building these platforms with the best-in-class security, best-in-class privacy. How do we think about community guidelines, terms of service, the usage of data over time? Because I don't think that we necessarily have to say, oh no, we're not going to collect any data or do anything, because I think data gives us a lot of benefits when it comes to supporting survivors. But I think we have to do it incredibly thoughtfully and anonymize data and, really serve to protect these survivors. But I think the last sort of thought I would leave with that is I think it's also recognizing, when I came into the space, I had this sort of perspective that survivors were these incredibly sensitive glass objects that, we had to just like be so careful with. And there's certainly an element of that that's very true. But I think the biggest thing I've learned is survivors are some of the most like kick-ass, amazing people that have this depth of experience in life and ability to support other people in a way that I've never seen. And so, using that, not always, being sensitive when we have to be sensitive, but building community and giving survivors the ability to connect with each other and not always having to be quite so sensitive, I think also has its own power and unique ability to change the movement.
Absolutely. Sorry if I
Yeah, I think Kyle, you came out the bushes on fire because I like everything you said. I think the piece that I would just add to it, and kind of echo as Kyle said, is just really being attuned to the fact that the survivor of today is going to be a different person tomorrow, next week, next month, maybe next year. And so we as an organization really have to be, or us as organizations that are particularly using technology in this space, always do have to be attuned to the fact that who we're serving looks different at different points. They have different needs at different points. And so maybe today this is my priority, but a month from now, I'm going to have a different priority and a different need. And so really thinking holistically about or as holistically as we can as to what are those different experiences, what are those different phases look like that people go through throughout this journey, and then how do we ensure that our technology is responsive to that, as well as we're keeping a tab as to what are those things that are changing, and how does our technology then need to shift to do those responses in an intentional way. So for us, we always get or are asking folks for feedback, and we do that at a large intersection, not just survivors, but we're working with legal folks, we're working with advocates, we're working with higher education. So for us, we have to keep all of those voices kind of as part of the conversation to say, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you experiencing? What would be of most or best use to you in terms of how we're offering our services, or how survivors engage with our services, or may use them to then engage with your services, so that they're getting the biggest benefit as they're engaging with our particular tool. And also thinking about how can we shorten or make most efficient that process for them so they don't have to hit so many hurdles. How can we lessen some of those barriers for survivors? And I think you can only do that if you have a good understanding of all the pieces that are part of the equation.
Absolutely. Shoshana, anything you want to add? So I'm going to go to our next question. And I'm probably going to add two kind of layers here. So we know that technology has undoubtedly like revolutionized the landscape of anti-sexual violence advocacy. But we also know that there's potential drawbacks and risks associated with its reliance. whether it's concerns from surrounding data security to unintended consequences of the algorithm going awry, or, you know, the things that come across our screens, like in social media. You know, there's a myriad of challenges to navigate, but I'm also thinking about how, when it comes to survivor advocacy, how it's important that we consider the use of technology and it being accessible and it being inclusive to all survivors, regardless of and with respect to their backgrounds and circumstances. And I think all of us had hit on this a little bit in our presentations, but if we can dive deeper in terms of talking about what the potential drawbacks there are, the risks that are associated, and how we as advocates can also ensure that there's accessibility and inclusivity in the use of technology, especially when we're thinking about things like language barriers and disabilities, you know, socioeconomic status, all those things. So you could either take apart those questions, or, you know, put it all together however you want. And you know, Shashina, Sarifa, Kai, whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. So a few things. I think you know, technology is a tool, and so utilizing it as a tool and not taking like the kind of set it and forget it mentality, like the tech will take care of everything, right? And especially as people, I'm thinking about presenters because we had these conversations, as people who are like directly creating and shaping the tool, you can get caught up in the minutia of the details, and like members become users and you're thinking about how they're accessing each thing and how they're clicking on things, all of which are important because it drives the website. It helps us to create better product for people. And it also has the potential to bring us further away from people, right? Bring us further away from the people we're creating the product for. And so I think that's a potential, but I think one, continuing to listen to survivors, making sure survivors are actually a part of the development of these tools, helps to reground you like in the purpose of the thing, right? Our ability to connect with each other is one of our greatest values and assets that we have. Like literally we need each other in our human development. And so ensuring that technology supports us in making that connection versus creating more distance between each other because we become so reliant on these things that just allow us to send a quick message or a heart something or star something, and takes away some of that deep interaction and understanding and depth that we get from talking with folks. And then the other thing I'll just say around accessibility is this is definitely an area to be proactive. We can be well-meaning, but not well-informed. And so making sure that you are working with people that have a better understanding of how to create access, whether it's working with technologists, whether it's working with people who have disabilities that can say, hey, that's a cute PowerPoint, but someone wouldn't be able to read that is really valuable. And so stepping outside of your comfort zone and asking for help and being intentional, and let's put the bottom line there, putting money towards these things, like not thinking about language justice at the end of your program, at the end of your budget, but starting there. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I'm gonna hop in there and then that'll get Kyle a few more seconds to think about it. So in terms of your question about potential drawbacks and or risks, I think one of the main things is that we have these really innovative solutions, right, that are designed to support survivors. A lot of times that is with the assumption that people don't have fear or lack of trust in terms of working with technology as well, right? Because that is a concern. Who can see my information? How are you using my information? How is that information being used by your organization or shared outside of that organization? And, you know, how do you ensure my safety, my privacy, my agency is maintained at all times as I'm engaging with your tools and your resources? So for us, we had to think about how do we do that in a way that is not opening us as the organization as well as the survivor up to defamation lawsuits, right? So the way that we've encrypted the system, we've done it in a way that not only protects us, but most importantly and most of paramount is protects the privacy of the survivor, so that they do have the utmost agency and ability to decide what options they are interested in, because we can't see any of their information, who our users are, what they're accessing in the system, and we did that with intention. But I think the other part of that, and always a piece with technology, is thinking about bad actors, right? People who may have malintention in using your particular service. And maybe that doesn't apply to everyone's tool that we are talking about today, but especially for us, and I could even potentially see somebody trying to do that in our wave capacity, maybe. But people will try to access a system, especially for us, recognizing that we're matching survivors of serial perpetrators. They may be interested to see, can I, as the perpetrator, find a match in this particular system, to see, is my information in here? Have I been identified in a particular way? And would I be connected with them? So for us, it's also thinking about the fact that, yes, it's a technology tool, but you also have to maintain a human element. And the human element is what allows us to kind of mitigate that risk. In terms of maybe a perpetrator is trying to use our system, but because we have that human element of a legal person looking at these entries for you to even know that there's a match, and there has to be some connection with a human person before you would even know that a match occurred. I think those are some of the pieces as well, is where do those human elements have to be maintained in order for the technology to do what it's supposed to do for survivors.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of those sentiments. And the only other small thing that I'll add is, I think something else that we're challenging more and more in our heads as well is, if we're thinking about, okay, how do we make the most successful product? And in our heads, that's impact, right? Whereas if we're comparing ourselves to a traditional tech company and a tech tool or platform, Meta's goal through Instagram or Facebook or whatever else is to monetize your attention and to have as much of your attention as possible so they can push you ads. And so we've had to recalibrate our thinking and say, we don't necessarily want survivors to be just reading an endless amount of stories on our platform, because the stories are heavy. And so how do we think about changing our algorithms or reducing the severity of some of the content that we have, so that we're not just re-traumatizing folks? How do we think more thoughtfully by rethinking the metrics that we're measuring success from, while still staying close with what the end user wants and is most beneficial to them? And so I think just thinking of things a little bit differently while still having this tech mindset of growth and how do we reach users and help people, I think that's something else we've been thinking about more.
Absolutely. So I'm actually, because I know we're up on time, I'm going to ask another two-part question, because I feel like we could talk about this all day. And in fact, we might have to do a part 2 of this, because everything y'all are saying is just phenomenal. But to kind of wrap us up a bit, what I would love to know from each of you, because I know for us at EROC, policy is a part of our mission. It's one of our pillars. In fact, it's the reason why we have been created. But in addition to the policy reform that we do, we especially want to make sure that there is governance on regulation that looks over ethical use of technology in this space when addressing sexual violence. And in fact, we know as advocates, we're the ones that help to shape some of that legal and regulatory landscape. So in addition to, from your perspective, how we can use policies and regulations to promote the responsible and ethical use of technology, I also would love for you to share, in addition to that, what types of resources should we ensure are widely accessible and culturally responsive? Because I think what also gets lost sometimes in policy reform is we only think of one particular person or set of people, but we don't always necessarily think of people from different walks of life, and making sure that everyone essentially is provided with the support and resources they need. So how do we promote policy, ethical governance over ethical regulations that promote responsible, ethical use of technology? And how can we ensure that there are resources out there for everyone? And Kyle, I'll go back to you.
Yeah, yeah. I might tackle the second piece first. So how oh goodness. So how do we, sorry, can you reframe the second question? I literally just spaced.
Oh, you're good. No. So essentially, how do we ensure that resources that we have created, these technological tools that we've created, are widely accessible and culturally responsive, especially as it relates to the policy reform that we're doing to make sure that we're having responsible and ethical use of that technology?
Yeah, I think, and thank you for that. I think for us, the way that we think about it is, back to sort of what I was saying earlier about meeting people where they're at. I think there's different ways to meet people where they're at. We're an international platform, so obviously I'd say the best way is language translation. How do we meet people where they're at in terms of their language and the specific language that they use? And so I think at a very bare bones level, we can make our text accessible so that browsers can read it in different languages. But sort of taking a step up from that, can we specifically change that language so that other folks can find it, and so that we can find the cultural differences in the way people use information. And I think from a policy side, where we're really focused on is using our data set to empower researchers on our team to put white papers out in the world, to present information, to give a better understanding of the core problem as we are dealing with survivors that have experienced things, and to highlight particular issues or patterns that we've seen that we feel like are not seen in the space. So I think from our lens, we're really using our data to try to do more and more of that work. Use the data to inform folks that are in those circles and have those connections and making those changes, because that's not our specialty, but what our specialty is certainly empowering them with data from our community.
I think for us, we're not necessarily in the space of advocacy related to technology, or the use of technology, but I will say that in terms of, each time that Title IX has been evaluated and or revised or updated in terms of its policies and regulations, we have been very vocal about the fact that there needs to be added policy and or attention related to serial perpetration on campuses, and ensuring that as part of those regulations, there is a requirement that campuses consider pattern evidence as a standard across all Title IX processes. Some campuses have it right now where, if I were, me and Kenyora were assaulted by the same person, we got connected and we wish to pursue something together, they would treat us as two separate cases instead of using us as, a joint case against one particular perpetrator. And so I think for the campuses that have that in place, they probably have seen more success in terms of removing those bad perpetrators from their campuses. However, that's not a standard across the field of higher education, and it should be. So we have been each time encouraging them to think about that issue and providing some regulation around what does that look like for campuses to adopt that as a policy or standard policy, an expectation that is both integrated into the process and communicated to survivors to say, hey, you have this option, because oftentimes students are aware of other folks who have been harmed by that person, but have no way of getting that joint accountability, one, without coming forward, and two, sometimes not sure if the Title IX process is going to honor that and or that they will actually get an accountability outcome. So I think that is part of it. I think we're also probably going to end up falling into that large discussion that's happening with Meta, those folks in the tech space around how information is shared, how user information is used, the privacy or protections around that information. Those things we do have to be attuned to as folks who are offering technology tools, especially for us that are asking information about people's unique identifiers or social media handles. So those are the types of things we do have to be attuned to. What are the regulations happening around that? And then how does that interact or impact our work in terms of how we serve survivors?
And I would just add really quickly just around, policy, and completely agree with Sarefa, and it is our responsibility as advocates to stay in the know and to be up on new legislation, and in that same vein, being aware of how technology is being used and abused. And so using this opportunity to talk about technology facilitated gender-based violence, right? Or digital misogynoir, or digital sexual violence. They're different names depending on who's having the conversation, but the point is technology is being utilized to cause further harm and to cause assault. And so being able to, one, be aware of this language, and also to be aware of this language and what's happening better positions us as advocates to actually start to then work on policy. One of the things that I know, and I consider myself a lay person when it comes to technology, there's not a lot of regulation, strong regulation around internet usage, around social media, and very, very limited policy and understanding around AI. And so as these things become more rampant and utilized by everyone on a day-to-day basis, that is also a lane for us to say, hey, are you thinking about survivors? Hey, are you paying attention to the impact of this tool on survivors? And so wanting to name that, so that, one, if you're not familiar with that concept, that you can start to think more about that, think about NTAB, think about Glitch UK as some potential resources. I know all of us have had these conversations with each other. And so, yeah, think about that in your advocacy. What are you aware of, and how can you start to advocate around policy that protects people in digital spaces?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, again, just such a rich conversation, rich discussion, and I'm just in awe of each and every one of you. I want to just say thank you to everyone who has tuned in and been a witness to the greatness that I know I see before me. So as we draw near to the conclusion of this webinar, again, I'm just deeply inspired by the depth, insights, experiences, and commitment shared by our partners. So again, please send all your emojis in the chat to show your love. But as we embark on a journey of exploring the intersection of technology and survivor advocacy in the fight against sexual violence, whether it's from examining innovative solutions to confronting risks and challenges to using technology as a tool towards healing and justice, I can say that our discussion has essentially underscored the complexities and the opportunities that lie ahead. So as we reflect on the conversations and the ideas that have been shared, it's clear that our collective strength lies in our collaborative and shared commitments to creating campuses in a world free from sexual violence. Each of us, whether we're advocates, survivors ourselves, friends of survivors, or whatever our role may be, we play a vital role in this ongoing journey towards healing, justice, and I dare say empowerment and joy. So as we depart from this virtual space, let us carry forward the lessons that have been learned and forged today. Let us continue to amplify the voices of those who are marginalized and most disproportionately impacted in this space. And let's advocate for more equitable access to resources and support. And while I would say work tirelessly, please make sure you're also taking care of yourselves in this space and that you're indulging in as much self-care as possible as we continue to dismantle the systemic barriers that perpetuate cycles of violence and oppression. Please take care of yourselves, and thank you so much for your unwavering dedication and commitment to this critical movement.